The large man stood in the corner of my dark room, peering at me through puffy slits surrounded by a century's worth of deep eye bags and crust. Every breath his ancient body took was accompanied by loud wheezing, and the occasional band of elastic spittle dripped from a bulbous head, which was 2, maybe 3 times the size of a normal man's. I estimated his height to be close to 7 feet, despite his Quasimodo-esque hunch, likely meaning his true size was much larger. Grease-covered, meaty hands hung limply at his sides, and long, jagged nails conjured images of him tearing into flesh and bone with ease. I cowered from the monstrous figure by my bedside, calculating how fast I could get the door open before he could move his hulking frame to drag me into the deepest pits of hell. We were at a stalemate. We analyzed each other for an uncomfortably long time, neither daring to make a move. There was an unspoken agreement that the first action of this encounter would set the stage for every succeeding event. I couldn't die here. A simple twitch of my foot in preparation for the sprint of my lifetime set this dark play into motion. His eyes grew to the size of baseballs with pinpoint black dots tracking my every move. In hopes of creating some distance, I flung my bedsheets toward him, rolled to my knees, and scrambled forward like a frightened dog, hoping to escape. A primal scream erupted from my throat as I reached for the doorknob, my fingers barely touching it before I felt a sticky, warm feeling on my calf. I spun around and saw the man's hand had wholly wrapped around my leg like an anaconda suffocating its prey. Try as I might to kick the hand off of me, the immense strength of the homunculus was far beyond what the elderly appearance would suggest. The man's beak-like nose seemed to hone in on me, frantically wiggling in the air while he took in large sniffs in rapid succession. His disproportionately long arm creaked as it dragged me toward him. I scraped the carpet until my nails bled, kicking and screaming like a desperate animal caught in a bear trap. A deep sound rumbled from the man that resembled a slow laugh. Finally, he brought me to him. His face was adorned with a large smile filled with hundreds of crooked yellow teeth. For a moment, he simply looked me over. It felt like he could see every cell in my body, and then he stopped. The man grabbed me by the shoulders and dropped me onto my bed. Again, I tried to make for the door, and again I was dragged backward. This time, he made sure to slam me against the wall before placing me back on my bed as punishment for trying to run. This time, he put his hulking frame in the path, and then he spoke. He was slow and methodical. His voice was gruff, and his throat almost sounded as if full of sores, but it was still clear. "You called for me." What?" I said, holding back tears and an oncoming panic attack. The man puffed, stepped back, and pointed a long, crooked finger toward the ground. "You call for me. Here, I am here." Again, I shook my head and eked out a weak, "No, I didn't." He stomped his foot, turned around, and made a harsh gurgle before turning back with his hands together in the form of a prayer. "You call for me." A large smile crept back onto his face. His pupils rolled back into his head as his jaw unhinged from its previous position, and without moving his lips, a voice, almost like a record, came from his gut, and it was Jesus, it was mine. I was crying. A deep sorrow was evident in every inhale. No wonder. I had been extremely depressed. Things in my life weren't anywhere near what I expected at 32. Financial struggles developed as I slowly saw my hopes and dreams slipping away. I was becoming just another person, another accidental birth who would eventually melt into the great gray fog of unremarkable, unimportant boringness. I'd leave no true mark on the world all the while. I'd have to deal with all the pain that came with it. the ever-growing darkness of the news cycle. My friends seemed to all be slipping away. My brother was sick. He didn't tell me with what, but he looked worse every time I saw him. My life was a constant cycle of blah and who cares, doing the same thing over and over and over again until eventually the grave called with a more permanent routine. And to top it off, I was lonely. A 3-year relationship had ended a couple of months back. I was feeling the pain and bitterness of every moment I had to endure, knowing that despite my efforts, I wasn't good enough for other people despite seeing those who were objectively worse people be happy and raise families. Suffice it to say, I was very depressed. I wasn't religious. I left religion a while ago, but I suppose some repressed part of me held on to spirituality strongly enough to force me to say a prayer tonight. The same prayer now coming from this monster's mouth. "Please, I don't know who or what is out there," I said, fighting back tears. "I'm doing really bad right now, very fucking bad. I don't know where I'm going or if it's even worth heading there. I've tried to be a good man. I haven't always been successful. But damn it, I've tried. If you're up there, please send me something to guide me in the direction I'm meant to go. I don't need to be a billionaire or a CEO. All I'm asking, all I need is a guardian angel to guide me towards purpose, and maybe, if I'm lucky, a bit of happiness. Please." When my begging ceased, the creature's jaw snapped back into place with a disgusting, cracking sound. Its eyes rolled forward to focus on me, and it grinned again. Its smile came with a sudden realization. It took a step back, allowing me to stand, but it was as if my body was filled with concrete. "No, no," I whispered as I shook my head. "No, no, no. This was my guardian angel. As if it could hear the thoughts in my head, it gave a slight nod, turned its hulking frame, and walked out of my door, somehow pulling its massive body through the relatively small doorway. I stood and watched it walk away, hoping it'd never return, but all it took was a glance back from the angel that I knew it wanted me to follow, and so I did. We walked out to the street and down the sidewalk. A quick look at my phone showed me it was close to 2 a.m. The odd car would pass by, but none so much as slowed down when passing the angel and I. I let it lead me to wherever it needed us to go. Neither of us spoke. We walked for what felt like over an hour, until we finally reached a foul-smelling canal. The angel pointed a crooked finger down. I stood at the canal's edge, heart pounding against my chest. Something was down there, but my mind refused to acknowledge it. When I finally mustered the courage to use the flashlight on my phone, it trembled in my hand. There, laying perfectly still, was a man. His face appeared swollen, his puffy neck pulled to an unnatural angle, and what seemed to be the protrusions from broken bones poked through his clothes. I'd never seen a dead body before, and even so, despite that, it wasn't the shock of that moment that truly made my skin crawl. Number. When I shone a light onto the man's face, I saw that he was me. How could this be possible? I wasn't dead. I didn't do the things I had thought about last night, had I? Was all of this some sort of hallucination? No, this can't be me. How could I be dead? I'm standing right here, I yelled at the angel. This has to be some kind of misunderstanding or an awful nightmare. I turned to the angel, expecting some kind of answer, but all I got in return was that horrible, wide smile. "Say something, damn it, I'm not dead," I shouted, furious at what the angel had shown me. It has to be some sort of trick or hallucination it was inducing. "Stop smiling. I'm not dead, I'm not dead." The angel took a slow step toward me, and I backed up. It took another step. This time, I stumbled. Fear shot through my body. My movements were shaky. I contemplated grabbing a fistful of dirt and throwing it at the creature to distract it while I ran, but thoughts of how that plan had failed back at my apartment flashed through my mind. Maybe if I just turned and ran? Could I go to a friend's house? No, no one was close enough on foot. A police station? None are open at 2 a.m., and besides, I couldn't tell them I was being pursued by an angel from hell. What if I camped inside a convenience store? Just until I felt it was safe. I settled on my plan, but the angel had me by the jugular before I could turn and run. It held me in the air as I struggled to breathe. Its smile seemed to be growing more expansive, and its dark pupils now filled the entirety of its sclera. It held me over the edge of the canal, stretching out its arm until I was directly over my own dead body. "Get in!" it shouted with a visceral hiss. "Get in!" Its eyes flashed rainbow colors. "Get in! Get in! Get in! Get in!" It shook me up and down, your body, your future. It mocked me, unhinging its jaw again and playing back the sound of me crying. I screamed, begging anyone or anything to save me from this demon. "I don't want to die," I pleaded. "I don't want that future, I just want to be happy." I struggled against the angel, but its ice-cold grip locked me in place. I feared that if it didn't kill me after dropping me into my dead body down there, it would do so by freezing my airway. Despite its cold touch around my neck, I could feel my skin begin to burn. Scorching flames simultaneously appeared from the dead body below. With each passing second, I began to sweat more profusely, every droplet raising the columns of fire toward me. The undeniable sound of maggots crawling over each other to reach soft flesh filled my ears. The unmistakable sight of cockroaches streaming out from under my clothes added a new layer of panic from within. All the while, a rising chorus of sobbing from thousands, no, millions of tortured souls, each experiencing their own version of damnation, played in the background. This was hell. This is what awaited me in death. What felt like hours rolled by until finally, I felt solid ground under my feet. The fire was gone. The insects had left my body. All I experienced was the cool air, and the angel looked down at me. This time, it was frowning. Again, it spoke. This time, in a voice I hadn't heard before. This one was soft and caring. "You don't want to die yet, do you, my child? You want happiness and love." I tried to speak, but no words came, so I simply shook my head. The angel nodded. "You are loved, my child. We are watching over you." For a moment, I swore I could see the outline of white wings extending behind it. It took a step toward me and placed a hand on my forehead. For a long moment, I felt bliss. It was true peace like I hadn't since I was a young boy. The world opened up. Boundless opportunity and energy were before me. I felt the good of humanity and the most profound urge to share that goodness. There was nothing I could do but smile at this indescribably beautiful feeling. And then, the cold blade of reality pierced through the bliss. I saw pain, suffering, and sorrow. In an instant, I experienced the slow fall of humanity. The beginning of the end seemed simple enough, a slow degradation of human connection. Deeper divisions between people, the fall of objective truth. Minor issues that the common man believed would eventually disappear because surely our species was too intelligent and advanced to let it ruin us. Then, the problems grew out of control. What once seemed to be symptoms of a changing society became defining features of an increasingly bitter and cold world. All the while, the degradation of our planet, the dwindling of our resources, and a species who opted toward acts of violence over coming together to find solutions, primarily because they couldn't agree on the fundamental issues or causes at hand, led to wars. Disease came, pain, suffering, great fires, A billion lost lives, man and beast, among the rubble of once great cities. A spiral into a collective madness that drew horrors and a broken society, leaving humans so much different, so much more savage, hateful, raw than any incarnation before it. I saw horrors beyond horrors I dare not repeat here, but what I can say is that there's a lot that can destroy a world. I saw how all of these things, tiny little things, come together to form monsters. They intermingled, they fed each other, they grew, until pain was the only thing man could understand. This was the world that awaited us. When he removed his hand from my head, I found myself on my knees while the visions melted away. It was a future that I hated. I looked up at the smiling angel. His calm voice had returned. "You know what you must do then, yes?" My answer was as sure as anything I'd ever contemplated in my life. "Yes." Satisfied, the angel gently guided my head toward its cracked lips, gave me a soft kiss on the forehead, and pulled me into a tight hug. I cried in its embrace. And then, unexpectedly, it began to sing to me in the most beautiful voice. For what it's worth, the song was joyous. Maybe the most beautiful voice I had ever heard. It gave me a hint of that bliss I had initially felt. For a moment, I actually believed everything would be okay. Just as soon as it had come, it was gone. I walked home, knowing what came next. The very next day, I went to worship. I won't say which specific belief system or type of institution, but the angel made it very clear. The visions it gave me were accurate. The fall of humanity was coming. Not only that, but the specific belief system I was now part of had a hand in that downfall. A significant role at that. Its angels were watching and smiling down. One may ask, of course, why I'd choose to be part of something that I know will lead to something horrible for all of humanity. The answer is pretty simple. The alternative is death. As wrong as it sounds, I don't know when that future will come. I may be part of it, I may not. But death is a guarantee. It will come for me as it does for us all, but through worship, I have a purpose. I have a group of people to share philosophy with, goals I can stick to, and a community to turn to. For the moment, I can defer the eternity of suffering and pain that awaits me. Even if, or when, my joining contributes to suffering down the line, I don't care. If you felt what I felt as I was suspended over my own body, if you knew how long a few mere seconds felt, you'd do anything to postpone that as well. It's not like I can stop what's to come anyway. And hey, I have a purpose for the first time in a long time. I'm happy. Even met a woman. Ultimately, I choose to take the wins where I can and control what I can within my own life. And that's good enough for me. Hell, if I get lucky, maybe I'll forget any of this ever happened. However, writing this out seems counterintuitive to that goal. But perhaps that's why I'm doing it. Maybe part of me believes I shouldn't forget. I don't know. All that said, there is another significant change in my life. I can still feel my angel watching me sometimes. Often, with more than one pair of eyes, as if he isn't the only thing from the darkness peering into the hearts of men, guiding them in such a way beyond our grasp. I still wonder just why they do it. For entertainment? For curiosity? Whatever the reason, when I'm alone in the dark, I always keep my eyes shut until the sun illuminates every corner of my room.
I remember the first time I saw the Mourne Mountains in the mist. It was a Friday, just after the rain had passed, and the clouds were still clinging to the peaks like a shroud over a corpse. I was young then, just 15, but already too familiar with the violent world of Northern Ireland. A world that made your skin crawl and your heart beat like a drum at night. The troubles were in full swing, and the air was thick with fear, suspicion, and the crackle of gunfire. It was my Uncle Dan who first took me to the mountains. He was a quiet man, the kind whose silence made you nervous, as if he were hiding something just out of reach. He was a big man, broad-shouldered with hands that looked like they could break a neck in a second. I'd always known that Dan was involved in things. Things my mother warned me to stay away from, even if she didn't say it outright. "We're going to the mountains of Morn tomorrow at dusk," he'd said, his voice low and grave, like a whisper from the grave itself. "Some business that needs attending to." I didn't ask questions. No one did. Not with the way things were at the time. My cousins had been involved with the IRA for years, but Dan, though he wasn't as vocal about it, was tied to the underground in ways most people couldn't imagine. I just knew that if he said business, you did it, no matter what. His calls were cryptic, but they were never ignored. We drove out of Belfast in the early evening, the sky darkening like the bruises on a child's skin. As we got closer to the mountains, the landscape began to twist and change. The rolling hills gave way to jagged rocks and cliffs that seemed to claw at the sky. It was like a place out of time, untouched by anything human. We parked the car by a small stone wall, the engine's dying hum mixing with the faint sounds of birds calling from the trees. Dan didn't say a word as we climbed over the wall and made our way up the rough path that led into the hills. The air was colder now, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. We passed the ruins of old stone cottages, their windows shattered, their roofs caved in. Remnants of a time long gone, but not a time before the British had come, I knew. Every step seemed to echo in the emptiness, like the mountains themselves were watching us. Eventually, after a long, wordless hike, we went off the course up to the peak, instead veering into the woods in a slightly flatter area. A few minutes later, we reached a small clearing, a patch of land where the grass grew tall and wild. There were trees in every direction, but where we stood, we could see clearly up to the night sky. In the center of the clearing, there were a bunch of large rocks of about the same size. Some toppled over in a vague circle. But the way the ground devoted in some spots and shaped around the rocks told me that at some point in time, they must have been placed more uniformly. Dan stopped, his eyes scanning the murky woods. He pulled something from his jacket, a package wrapped in brown paper, and laid it carefully on the ground. "Wait here," he muttered. I didn't argue. I knew better than to ask questions, but something about the place set my nerves on edge. It was as if the land itself was alive, and it didn't want us there. The wind whispered through the trees, and I could hear the faint crackling of static in the air, as if the mountains themselves were speaking in a language I couldn't understand. I turned my back for just a moment, trying to steady my breath, and that's when I heard it. A voice, low and guttural, like a growl or a murmur, coming from somewhere deep in the woods. "Dan!" I breathed, but my voice was swallowed by the wind. My eyes scanned the trees, but I saw nothing. My heart raced. I wasn't sure if I'd heard it at all, or if the stress of the situation had finally gotten to me. But I knew something was wrong. The air felt thick, oppressive, like it was pressing down on my chest. I could hear the wind pick up, swirling around us in a frenzy. And then I saw it. It was a figure, that much I could make out. It was standing out in the trees, half hidden in the shadows. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. "Dan," I said again, but the words came out strangled, as if something had lodged in my chest. My uncle was still standing by the package, his back turned to me, unaware. The figure in the trees moved closer. It moved in an unnatural way. You know how in older video games, characters don't exactly walk? They sort of just glide forward while displaying a walking animation? It was like that. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were made of stone, unable to move, as if the mountains themselves had taken root in my bones. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. No footsteps, no rustling of leaves, like it had melted back into the earth. "Come on, lad," Dan called, his voice flat. "Job's done." I blinked, my heart still pounding, and when I looked up again, the clearing was empty. The figure was gone, as if it had never been there. My mind was spinning, but I forced myself to walk over to my uncle. He gave me a sharp look, but I said nothing. There were a lot of things you just didn't talk about in Northern Ireland back then. Later, when we were driving back down the mountain road, I asked him, almost against my will, "Who was that man? Was he one of ours?" Dan didn't answer at first. He just kept his eyes on the road, the headlights cutting through the mist like two white knives. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "Not everything that roams these lands are of society, of our factions, lad. Some things never left, and some things, they come back. Forget about tonight. What happened tonight stays here, up in the morn." I didn't ask any more questions after that, but I've never forgotten the look in his eyes that night, the terror behind them. Not then, not now, and not 5 years later when I returned to that place. I joined the IRA in 1973 as soon as I turned 18. The troubles were in full bloom, each day a new round of bloodshed and madness. In the streets of Belfast, you couldn't go a day without hearing the crack of gunfire or the screech of tires as another bomb went off. You could feel it in the air, a tension so thick it seemed to press down on your chest, making it hard to breathe. People looked at each other like they were waiting for a reason to pull a trigger. It was the kind of place that could make even the toughest man turn soft, or worse, make him tough in ways you didn't want to know. And for a long time, I knew I wanted to fight for our cause. Back then, I would have died for a united Ireland, without hesitation. But that changed when I returned to the mountains of Mourne. It was the winter of '76, the year everything started to spiral out of control. The British had made it clear that they weren't backing down, and neither were we. The war had become a game of attrition, tit-for-tat ambushes, bombings, checkpoints, and killings. The usual. I was a lieutenant in the Belfast unit at the time, just a kid by the standards of the older men, but I had a reputation. You didn't make it as far as I did without learning how to kill with precision, how to move in silence, how to erase every trace of your presence in the world. But that wasn't what mattered to the ones who called the shots. What mattered was my loyalty. And when they said jump, I jumped. "Tommy," said Callahan, one of the senior men in the barracks, his eyes burning with some fever I couldn't place. He was a hard bastard, the kind who didn't flinch at much. His face was a craggy map of scars, the kind of man you wanted on your side if things went south. "You're going up to the Mournes tomorrow night. There's a job for you, a special one. Just you." I remember the weight of his words, the way he said it, like it wasn't a question, but a command. There wasn't a shred of doubt in his voice. I nodded, not wanting to ask too many questions. I remember thinking it was odd being sent alone. I'd always been part of a team, guys you could rely on when the shots rang out. But not this time. Callahan didn't give me much more than that. Just a nod, a brief handshake, and a look that told me not to ask questions. I didn't. That's how things worked. You didn't ask, you just did. And yes, of course, I'd always harbored a weird feeling towards the mountains of Mourne. Even though I had stowed away the memories of my visit to the place with my uncle 5 years ago in some corner of my brain, the idea of returning to the place filled me with dread. I didn't like it, but that didn't matter. I had orders. About a month passed and the date of the mission rolled around. I packed light, a pistol, a spare magazine, a grenade, and a map of the area. Sure, I knew what the objective was. Go to the location on the mountain chosen by the information broker and collect the document. But in truth, I had no idea what I was really walking into. None of us ever really did. But Callahan was always able to remind us that it wasn't just one mission, one robbery, one shootout. It was a war, no matter what label the Brits put on it. And when a man like that tells you to do something, you just do it. I grabbed my pack and made the long drive down the narrow roads toward the mountains, the sky bruised purple with the coming night. As I came to the outskirts of Belfast, the night grew wet and cold. The rain beat down on the windshield like it was angry, like the weather itself was trying to stop me. But I didn't care. I was used to it. As the city faded behind me, the air grew heavier. That was around the time the weight of things settled in my chest. Back to that place. Back to the mountains of fucking Mourne. I drove through Newry, but it wasn't long before the familiar roads fell away and the land opened up in front of me, a cold, dark expanse of rocky terrain, blanketed in mist. The Mournes rising high and impossible, looming over me, an old nightmare I couldn't wake from. When I arrived at the foot of Slive Donard, the highest peak, I left the car parked by the side of the road and started on foot. The night had already swallowed the daylight, and the mountains seemed to hold their breath as I walked. The air grew colder with each step, and the silence pressed against me like a physical thing. There was no wind, no sound of animals, no rustling of the trees. It was as though the mountain itself was waiting, watching. As I climbed the trail, the mist grew thicker, curling around me like a living thing, a slow-moving fog that swallowed everything in its path. The crunch of my boots against the stones was the only sound for miles. The mountains stretched ahead of me, vast and cold, their peaks shrouded in the darkness of night. Every step felt heavier, like the land itself was pulling me down. I didn't know why I was here, why this was the location chosen by an information broker. I'd asked Callahan once, a few weeks back, when the orders first came through, but he just gave me that look, the one that told me to keep my mouth shut. "You'll understand when you get there," he said, and that was all. I knew the terrain well enough. I'd done plenty of jobs in the various hills around Belfast, plenty of walking through fog and shadow, and I'd never forgotten that night with Dan years ago. It scared me. I feel no shame in admitting it. But orders were orders. This felt different to any mission before, though. There was something about the air, something about the way the landscape seemed to close in on me, that made me feel like prey. I reached the spot the map marked for my destination by the time the moon was full overhead, casting long, thin shadows across the ground. An open area, close to the very peak of the mountain. I paused for a moment, my senses on edge, but I forced myself to walk towards the center. My orders were clear: meet the contact, get the information, and return. That was it. No questions, quiet, no fuss. The fog was so dense up here that I genuinely couldn't know for certain if the person I was sent to meet was there or not. But as I hesitantly made my way forward, something changed. The air thickened, the temperature dropping even further, until I could see my breath hanging in the air like smoke. I didn't understand it. The cold wasn't normal. It wasn't just winter cold. It was a deep, unnatural cold that seemed to come from the very ground beneath my feet and encompass me up to the tip of my scalp. And then I heard it, a voice, low, guttural, and ancient. "Tommy McGrath." I froze. It wasn't a human voice. It was older. It came from the earth itself, from the stones. It was as though the mountain was speaking directly to me. My heart raced, my hand instinctively reaching for the pistol at my side. "Tommy," the voice repeated, "you've been chosen." The words echoed in my head, vibrating through my bones. "Chosen for what?" I whispered, not meaning to speak aloud, but unable to stop myself. The mist swirled around me, thickening until I could barely see the hand in front of my face. A figure emerged from the fog, a man tall and thin, dressed in black. His face was hidden in shadow, but I knew it was him. Callahan. It had to be. "You've come," Callahan's voice came from the figure, but it wasn't quite his voice. It was deeper, older. "It's time." "Time for what?" I demanded, stepping back, my grip tightening on the gun. "What the hell's going on here, Callahan?" He stepped closer, his eyes gleaming like coal in the dim light. And then he smiled. But it wasn't the kind of smile I'd ever seen on him before. It was the smile of someone who knew something you didn't, something you could never know. A smile that was as old as the hills themselves. "You've been chosen, Tommy," he said again, this time with a slow, deliberate drawl, "for the final stage of the war. The war you don't understand yet." I stared at him, not sure if he was speaking in riddles or if I was just losing my mind in the mountains. "Listen, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, but this isn't funny. Where's the contact?" "There is no contact," Callahan said, his voice suddenly cold. "There never was. What in God's name are you playing at?" But Callahan didn't answer. Instead, the fog around us thickened again, and the ground beneath my feet trembled. The stones of the circle began to glow faintly, a sickly green light pulsing from within them. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to run, but the fear in my chest held me in place. "You've been part of this all along, Tommy," Callahan continued, his eyes burning with an intensity that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. You were chosen before you even knew what was happening. The mountains have chosen you. The war was never just about politics or even blood. It's about something much older. I shook my head, trying to process his words, but they didn't make sense. The Troubles wasn't a war for gods or for land. This was a war for the Irish people, a war for survival. You've been feeding it, Callahan said as though reading my thoughts. The blood, the violence, the hatred. The Mourns have fed on it for centuries. You and all the others like you are just the latest offering. The stone circle began to tremble, and the figures in the fog moved closer. Callahan stepped forward, and I realized with a sickening certainty that he wasn't one of us. He was one of them, a servant of whatever dark force had been awakened in the Mourn, a force that fed on blood, on war, on the sacrifices we made without even knowing it. He grinned again. You've been feeding it, Tommy, and now it's time for you to give it what it wants. With that, the fog closed in further. I reached for my gun, ready to blow a hole through Callahan, but he'd already sank back into the fog, and I never saw him again, not after all these years. I stumbled after him but lost my way, running blindly, and eventually I realized that I was lying to myself if I believed I was chasing him. I was really running away in fear. I used to think the scariest thing in the world was the guy in the streets of Belfast who would shoot you without a thought. But I was wrong. I hadn't felt fear like this before in my life. I kept running downhill and found my way into a wooded area. It wasn't long before I came upon a clearing, a wide space where there were no trees. And then to my absolute horror, I realized where I really was. There, in the middle, was the old stone circle, where Dan took me all those years ago. I stood there for a moment, staring at the stones in total helplessness. In the dim light of the moon, I realized that the stones were different to how I remembered them. I could see faint markings on them, symbols I couldn't understand, and words in Old Gaelic I couldn't translate. Under British occupation, we were never taught our country's own language. They were the kind of things you might expect to find on a tombstone or a forgotten altar. It was as if someone had carved them into the rocks long ago, as if the earth itself had grown old with them, even though I knew they'd been placed sometime in the last 5 years. Then I heard it, a voice, low, rumbling, like a growl from deep beneath the earth. You shouldn't have come. I froze. The voice didn't sound like a man, or even a human at all. It was as if the mountain itself had spoken, the words carried on the wind, vibrating in my chest. My breath caught, and I gripped the gun at my side. But then through the fog, I saw movement, figures tall and gaunt, slipping in and out of the mist. They weren't quite people, more like shadows, their bodies flickering like candle flames caught in a gust of wind. They moved without sound, without footsteps, their faces obscured by the fog. My heart hammered in my chest. Leave now, or you'll never leave. I spun around. There, just outside the stone circle, staring straight at me from just a meter or two away, was a man, or at least what looked like one. His clothes were tattered, like he'd been out here for years, and his face was impossibly pale, almost milk white, as though he hadn't seen the sun in decades. His eyes were dark, not the kind of dark you'd expect, but great black orbs in his sockets with no visible iris, pupils, or white parts. Even hunched over, he towered over me, his arms hanging down to almost his shins, and his voice was the same as the growl. It came from somewhere deep inside him, like it was being pulled out by something far older than him. You've trespassed on sacred ground, soldier, he whispered. You don't belong here. You were never meant to find us. And then I understood. The man wasn't human. No, not exactly. He was something far older, something tied to the land, to the mountains themselves. He wasn't here by choice. He was a part of the Mourne Mountains, a part of the ancient earth that had seen too much bloodshed, too many sacrifices, too much history soaked into the soil, and I had just walked into the middle of it. Don't you see? He said, low and rasping as he drew closer to me. This land has known war long before the likes of your armies ever set foot on it. It's soaked in the blood of those who died here, in battles you'll never understand, and now you're part of it. I stumbled back. the weight of his words sinking in. The mountains, the stones, the fog, everything around me seemed alive now, as though the earth itself was watching me, judging me. The men I had killed, the bombs I had planted, the lives I had taken, suddenly it all felt like a grain of sand in an ocean of blood, meaningless against the weight of something far darker. "You'll never leave, Tommy," the being whispered again, and for the first time I felt it, the pull. It wasn't just in my head, it was physical, like the earth itself was reaching for me, drawing me into the stones, into the silence of the mountains. For a moment I stood there, my mind spinning, my body frozen, and then the truth hit me like a slap to the face. This wasn't about a simple message. It wasn't about the IRA or the war or Callahan or some mission. It was about something far older, far darker than anything I'd ever known. The Mourns weren't just mountains. They were a place of power, a place of blood, a place where the past never died. And I had trespassed. I had disturbed the land. The fog began to swirl faster now, the whispers louder, more insistent. I could feel the cold grip of the mountain on my chest, and I knew I would never leave this place. Not really. More and more figures flickered in and out of my peripheral in the fog, as the impossible being I was facing took a final step forward and looked at me. His almost mummified, haunting face twisted into an expression of what seemed to be pity. "You were never meant to leave," he rasped, quieter now despite him being right in front of me. "You'll be lost for as long as you live, tied to this place. You and I and those who hear already and those to come." I blinked and suddenly the fog was completely gone. The wraith-like things swirling in it disappeared with it. But not whoever I was speaking to. Before my eyes he remained. "Please leave now, soldier. You may be lucky enough to not lose yourself." And with that, he turned around and slowly walked away unnaturally, back into the trees. As I turned and ran, my feet stumbling over the uneven ground, I felt the darkness closing in around my mind. The mountain's voice echoed in my ears, a low, suffocating hum. "You were never meant to leave." And when I finally looked back, all I saw was the fog and the cold, empty stones of the Mourne Mountains. And I knew then that I was lost, forever. I've lived a long life, left the IRA, started a family and made the best of the world despite the things I'd done as a soldier. But through all of it, the call of the mountains has never left me, never given my mind true peace. The mountains of Mourne want me to come back, and I don't know how long I'll be able to resist their pull. My wife's been dead just over a year now. My son never came back from America for longer than a week at a time once he finished college and moved there to pursue some dream or the other. I'm just an old man with declining health living alone in the same old Belfast street, and the Mourns haunt me more than ever before. I fear the day I'll give in and give myself to the mountains. Let them take me fully, but I often wonder if maybe they already have. The war was never meant to end. It was meant to feed the darkness, forever. I killed my first crow when I was 9. I wish I could say it was an accident, but that'd be a lie. I'd been watching it for about a week. It came to our yard around the same time each morning. It knew it was the same crow because of the white blotch around one of its eyes, almost like some kind of birthmark. It would hop around, peck at the dirt for a bit, and then fly away. I'm not sure why it kept to this routine. It wasn't like we were leaving food out for it or anything. One day, for whatever reason, I decided to pick up a stone and throw it at it. I missed, only succeeding in scaring the poor thing off. I didn't expect to see it again, but lo and behold, the next morning as I looked out the kitchen window, there it was, right on schedule. I ran out, got another rock, threw it at it, and off it flew, only to come back the following day. We kept this dance going pretty much throughout the whole of summer. In hindsight, I think I understand why I wanted to hurt it so badly. I was jealous. Unlike it, I couldn't just fly away whenever I wanted. I was stuck here, confined to the ground, confined to this hellhole of a house. It was as if it knew that and came back every day just to taunt me. Inevitably, the stone did find its mark. I was just as surprised as the bird when I finally managed to hit it mid-takeoff, sending it back down to the ground. There it continued to thrash and flap around, but try as it might, it couldn't get airborne again. One of its wings didn't seem to be cooperating. After a while, it gave up and just sat there in the middle of the sunburnt grass, its chest puffing and deflating, its head swiveling in all directions. I grabbed the largest of the lawn ornaments scattered throughout the backyard, lifted it with both hands and slowly walked it over to my wounded quarry. The bird stayed put. It definitely saw me coming, but for whatever reason, didn't even try and move away. I raised the hefty porcelain rabbit halfway over my head, and using every ounce of force my skinny little arms could generate, brought its full weight back down on the helpless creature, over and over. There was so much blood. I could feel its warmth on my hands and face as it sprayed after every impact. Only once I was done pulverizing the crow into a glistening mass of broken bones and feathers did I realize that it didn't make me feel any better. I was still just as angry, just as sad. Only now there was a layer of guilt on top of it all. Suddenly, I heard my mom call me from inside the house, and my whole body froze. She shouted for me to go upstairs and get my stuff ready, since Dad was coming to pick me up in an hour. I didn't even look back. I just responded with an uneven, "Oh, okay." Guilt turned into panic. In hindsight, I could have just put the ornament back where I found it, maybe wiped off the blood, and nobody would have been the wiser. My mom hardly ever went out into the backyard anymore. And even if she did, she probably would have assumed that a stray cat was responsible for the mess. But in my 9-year-old brain, that wasn't enough. My mind was cycling through progressively more hopeless scenarios. If Mom found out, she'd tell Dad. And what if he stopped coming over? What if the neighbor's kids saw it and blabbed to everyone at school? They'd think I was an even bigger weirdo than they already did. The lump in my throat grew larger. My eyes fell back down to the bird, or what remained of it. Conflicting emotions wriggled like worms in my gut. Then an unspeakable thought emerged. I could, eat it. The impulse was primal, almost instinctive, stemming from the same raw envy that led me to this gruesome act in the first place. But in a twisted way, it did make sense. I mean, no one batted an eye when Granddad used to take me fishing. Even though we caught and killed the fish, it was all good because we ate them afterward, right? Killing isn't bad when it's done for food. Animals do it all the time and we don't judge them for it. I reached out, fingers trembling, and turned the limp body over to reveal its sleek, ebony feathers matted in crimson. There was an almost metallic scent emanating from it as I picked it off the ground. I held my breath and bit into the still warm flesh. Its sinewy textures resisted my teeth as blood gushed inside my mouth. The taste was foreign, tangy. It was neither pleasant nor unpleasant, it just was. Strips of stringy tissue clung stubbornly to the carcass. I had to chew through each one individually. Forcing the first piece down was tough. It slid down my throat like a thick, sluggish rope. With no choice but to continue, I tore off another piece, ligaments stretching, protesting as I yanked it away. Each chew echoed in my ears, a sickening squelch against the backdrop of chirping insects and rustling leaves, as if nature itself were holding its breath in disbelief. And it wasn't the only one. "Jacob, what the hell are you doing?" I dropped my kill and snapped back to see my parents standing at the edge of the yard. Their faces were a mask of disbelief and revulsion as I stared at them, my mouth full of raw meat and feathers. A trail of hot blood dripped down my chin. That's how it started. The next time I ate a crow, I was 16. I spotted it at a park and immediately knew it was the one. Its feathers were a deep, rich black, like charcoal, and its beak had an unusual shape, curving subtly inward at the tip. Whether as a result of some old injury or that's just how it grew, I'm no bird expert, so I can't really say. All I knew was that it made my mouth water just looking at it. This time, my hunting method was a tad more refined. I lured the creature to the ground with some food, and while it was busy snacking, I ambushed it with the rim of my tennis racket. It took several hits to fully incapacitate it, and then I ended its suffering with a quick stomp to the head. I didn't want it to struggle, that was never the point. I'm not some sicko sadist. I just needed it dead. If I had a more painless and effective way to do it, I would have gone for that. I looked around and, ensuring I had no audience, knelt beside the lifeless bird. The smell was unappetizing but also intoxicating, blood and earth, each whiff igniting something within me. I don't know what it was, but it felt right. As I sank my teeth into the stringy, warm flesh, the familiar metallic tang spilled across my tongue. The initial resistance of sinew gave way, and my incisors severed through muscle, stretching and snapping like a taut rubber band. I clamped down harder. My teeth started to ache as they hit bone. I tried to bite off its head, but it was both way too hard and way too messy, so I stuck to chewing through the soft middle part. Probably the worst part of the whole experience was the bits of intestines that kept getting stuck between my molars. When I was finished, I buried what was left and went home like nothing ever happened. Indulging my eccentric compulsion became a lot easier once I was old enough to legally purchase a firearm. I honestly don't know how I haven't gotten sick yet. I've tried cooking the meat, but it just isn't the same. I know what I'm doing can't be healthy, but then again, we all have our vices. Some people smoke, others rely on alcohol to dull the pain of daily existence. I just happen to enjoy munching on raw crows from time to time. In the grand scheme of self-destructive habits, I'd say mine is pretty manageable. Other than that one thing, I've had a pretty normal life up until recently. I graduated, went to college, got a job, a wife, and a mortgage. We were even talking about trying for a kid once we're a bit more financially stable. She obviously had no clue about my quirky little habits. Over the past few weeks, I've been toying with the idea of telling her, but I guess it's too late now. Yesterday, the boss let us off earlier than usual. Most of my co-workers headed out for drinks, but I was really looking forward to going home and surprising the wife. Maybe take her out on a nice long drive across town like we used to do. But when I pulled up in our driveway, I immediately sensed something was wrong. All the lights were off. The front door was hanging open, swaying in the cold December wind. Upon closer inspection, I realized that the lock was broken. Heart racing, I rushed inside. The darkness welcomed me back with indifference. I called out for my wife. The echo of her name hung in the still air, but only silence answered. My eyes darted around, searching for any signs of life, any movement whatsoever. That's when I heard it, a grotesque cacophony of caws and wet gurgles. It led me deeper into the bowels of the house, where the light from a broken window spilled onto the floor. The dreadful scene it illuminated shattered my entire world. There, sprawled across our kitchen, among the jagged beams of steel and fragmented glass, was Rachel. Her head hung at an awkward angle, her lifeless eyes wide and glassy as they bored into me. Hunched over her was something I'm having a hard time describing even now. Hairless and pink, its leathery skin extends over a body that's disturbingly humanoid, yet incorrect. It has a torso, shoulders, and legs that seem only partially formed, reminiscent of an oversized premature fetus. Instead of arms, it has a pair of stunted wings lacking feathers, and its skull is shaped like that of a crow, though disproportionately large for its scrawny frame. I just stood there, helpless and watching as it probed Rachel's mangled remains with its beak. Hunched over her was something I'm having a hard time describing even now. Hairless and pink, its leathery skin extends over a body that's disturbingly humanoid, yet incorrect. It has a torso, shoulders, and legs that seem only partially formed, reminiscent of an oversized premature fetus. Instead of arms, it has a pair of stunted wings lacking feathers, and its skull is shaped like that of a crow, though disproportionately large for its scrawny frame. I just stood there, helpless and watching as it probed Rachel's mangled remains with its beak. A part of me wanted to lash out at the thing, grab the nearest chair and beat it to a bloody pulp. But at the same time, I couldn't fully bring myself to hate it for what it had done. It's okay if you eat it after, right? The circle of life and all that. I may be a freak, perhaps not entirely right in the head, but I'll be damned if I add hypocrite onto that. It's still there in the kitchen, picking at my wife's dead body. I'm waiting for it to finish. I have my 9mm on my lap and a hatchet ready. I'll update you guys on how it tastes.
I've always been a creature of the city, the cold, hard streets, the tall, luminous skyscrapers, and the people, all self-absorbed in their own little stories to be concerned with person next to them on the subway, or the person they just rammed into trying to get where they needed to go. It's where I was born, it's what I'm used to, but sometimes you have to take a break from uniformity and treat yourself, and that's exactly what I did. I have a cousin down in Alabama, deep south. He invited me over, and it was something I've put off for way too long. What the hell? I guess it's time to mix things up. My plane landed after a 4.5-hour plane flight. My legs were cramped, my back was sore, and my brain was numb from the crying babies. But regardless, we landed. But I still had a long drive ahead of me before I could cash in at my cousin's place. After I got off the plane, I went to baggage retrieval, and then went to the car rental. Shocker of all shocks, the rental supplied me with a shitty old Ford hatchback. It seemed like the best car they had, but I did my best to ignore the mystery stain in the back seat. It was best that way. I pulled out of the rental and began the long drive out of the city and into the rural countryside. I am a complete fucking idiot. I did myself in, big time. I forgot to check the fuel gauge. Stupid, stupid, stupid. I was driving through a twisting dirt road, the sides lined with tall, dark trees, and the road beyond my headlight pitch black. And suddenly, I ran out of fuel. I pulled over, but I doubt that actually mattered. Who would use this obscure-ass dirt road in the middle of an Alabama backwoods? Answer: me, a complete and total idiot. As I tried hard not to completely second-guess my decision to come here, was having a real hard time with that. I got out of the car and stood on the side of the road. I looked at my cell phone, and sure enough, no service. The only way this could get worse is if Jason fucking Voorhees came crashing through the forest with his machete and ran me through. Regardless, I was stuck. Completely and totally. So I did the only thing I could. I crawled into the back seat of my car and tried to sleep. Why? Because I had nothing else, no other option. I couldn't make any calls, couldn't drive anywhere. So I would sleep, and in the morning I would walk through an Alabama backwoods. Yeah, I am totally fucked. This was my line of thinking as I lay on the seat, eyes staring at the ceiling. How was I supposed to fall asleep? I wasn't exactly in a safe neighborhood. Hell, I wasn't even in a neighborhood. And another thing, it was cold. Not the freezing it got in a New York winter, but cold enough that my light jacket couldn't stop me from shivering. I felt pathetic. I crawled up front to see if I could turn on the heater, but sure enough for this shitty car, it was busted. So I climbed back into the back seat and quietly whispered a swearing fit, the likes of which would make even angels cry. After that, I felt slightly better, but I still felt stupid for coming here. I felt even stupider for not checking the fuel gauge. God, that was so stupid. Like, mind-bogglingly so. But while I was hounding myself for my own unacceptably vast stupidity, I heard something that nearly made me cry in relief. A car engine and tires crunching on dirt. I practically leaped out of my car, swinging the door open with so much enthusiasm it should have broken the hinge. The car, that would surely be my saving grace, was currently only about 100 feet from me, and as it approached, it slowed. I stuck my thumb in the air, signifying I was hitchhiking. The car slowly pulled up beside me, and the window rolled down. Inside the cabin, a middle-aged man sat. His hair was gray and balding, his face round and chubby. He had a neat plaid dress shirt tucked into his khaki pants, and below his warm eyes, clad in rimless glasses, he gave me an amiable smile, and all my fears of the night were nearly dissolved. "Well, howdy, my friend. Looks like you found yourself in quite a predicament," he said benevolently. "Yes, sir," I said. He gave a hearty chuckle. "Yep, happens to the best of us, son. Especially those who ain't from these parts. I'd be happy to lend you a ride and let you stay in my home for the night till I can help you with your vehicle. This struck me as odd, as no one in New York would ever offer you a ride in the middle of night. That was a good way to get yourself mugged or raped or worse, but I, admittedly, decided to take full advantage of his blind trust. "Oh, thank you very much, sir, but I'm afraid my car's just out of gas." He nodded. "Ah, that's all right. We have plenty of gasoline back at my humble abode. Tell you what, I can drive you there and call roadside services to pick up your vehicle." I chuckled at this. "Again, no worries, sir. It's a rental. I can just call the company. I just can't get signal." He nodded again. "Well, alrighty then, son. I can just drive you to my home, and you can call the company. Till they arrive, you can sleep at my house." I felt overwhelmed with gratitude to this kindly stranger, but also a bit nervous. This kind of hospitality always set me on edge. No one was nice in New York unless they wanted to sell you something, but regardless, I decided to accept his offer. It was just my city instincts, after all. No need to be so judgmental. "That would be very kind of you, sir. Thank you." He smiled and nodded, leaned over the passenger seat and opened the door. I climbed into the seat and shut the door. The car smoothly accelerated as the man pressed his foot on the gas pedal. The inside of the car was well made, but it had an air of humbleness, as if the driver just wanted a car he could comfortably drive. I respected that. We drove in silence for 10 to 15 minutes until he spoke. "So, what brings you to these parts, son?" he asked politely. I told him about how my cousin had invited me to his house for the week, and how I took the opportunity to get away from the city. He smiled. "You know what, son? I've always wanted to visit the city myself, but I could never bear to spend too long away from home." I nodded. As much as I appreciated this stranger's help, I was not in the mood for extended conversation. And something still felt off. Was I really this unused to politeness, or was it something else? I was cut off from this train of guilt-ridden thoughts when the stranger spoke again. "Hey, son, would you kindly grab my eyeglass wipes from the glove box? I have this darn spot on my glasses." I nodded and opened the glove box. I didn't see them immediately, so I felt around in the glove box, and while I was moving around, my hand brushed against cool metal. I felt around it, and my senses confirmed it was a pistol. That was strange for me, because I didn't know anyone who carried in New York. I felt around some more, and my hand wrapped around a small box. I pulled it out and handed it to him. "Thank you kindly, son," he said. Now, maybe this wasn't my business, but it was strange for me. "I felt something in there. Do you carry?" I asked, probably rudely. The stranger didn't seem to mind. "Yes, I do indeed. I always carry a firearm in my vehicle. Makes me feel safer." I nodded. "Yeah, there's logic to that. It's just that where I'm from, it's so hard to get a gun that no one carries except criminals and gun fanatics." The stranger shook his head at that. "Darn shame that. Can't have too much protection nowadays, especially around this." A sharp bump from behind the car cut him off. He turned around, his eyes fixating out the back window, eyebrows cocked. "Son, if you would kindly wait in here, I'll be going out to investigate that." I nodded, and he exited the car. But that anxiety in my stomach was slowly churning more aggressively, and something felt very, very wrong. I decided to do something potentially very risky. I opened the glove box again and dug through it some more. After brushing past the pistol again, my hand found a book. But when I dug it out, it wasn't anything suspicious. It was a Bible. But something about this inconspicuous leather book set me on edge, so I opened it to the middle. And there, sitting in the center of a carved-out section of paper, lay a camping knife. I ran my fingers along the edge of the blade, and I saw something that horrified me. The blade was tinted slightly red along the edge. My stomach felt like it knotted several times as I asked myself a question I should have asked long before I entered this man's vehicle. Why was a man with a car this high quality driving through the Alabama backwoods? I quickly closed the book and stuffed it back into the glove box. I heard the trunk close, and his shoes crunching on the dirt as he slowly approached the car again. I saw his figure outside the door just before it swung open, and the man crawled back inside. He was shaking his head shamefully. "What was that sound?" I asked, trying to swallow down the building dread crawling up my throat. The stranger sighed. "It appears we hit a rabbit, son. It was dead when I got there, so I moved it out of the way." Suddenly, I was more acutely aware of the strange things he was saying, like, why would someone pick up a rabbit's corpse? And why had the noise come from the trunk if we had hit a rabbit? Had it come from the trunk? Nevertheless, my suspicions went unvoiced as I, too, shook my head at the falsified tragedy. "Shame," I said. The stranger cleaned his glasses before repositioning himself at the wheel. "Welp," he said, "no use crying over spilt milk. Let's keep on the move. We still got a good hour's drive ahead of us." As I made myself the very closest I could be to anything resembling comfort, I tried not to imagine what had actually made that noise, or what this guy was hiding. All I could think about was where I would be in the next hour, and what that meant for my personal health. We drove in silence for the next 20 minutes, the only sound the purr of the engine and the dirt underneath the car's tires. That, and my own heart pounding in my chest so hard I was surprised the stranger couldn't hear it. Or, my brain thought horribly, maybe he does hear it, and is just used to his victims' hearts doing the same. As we drove, my mind began racing, trying to formulate a plan on how to get out of this car. The best plan I had was saying I need to take a piss, and then bolting while I was free. But the stranger would probably just chase me, and I seriously didn't want to be chased through an Alabama backwoods by a knife-wielding Jesus freak. So I kept coming up with ideas. My best bet was using the gun to shoot the stranger and then driving back to civilization. But that would require proof of the stranger's psychotic nature, so I was stuck for the moment. Finally, I decided what I needed to do. I would get the stranger out of the car by saying I saw something on the side of the road. If he got out to investigate, I would get out of the car, grab the gun, and go around the back of the car to look in the trunk. This was an older car, so the trunk should have a hatch. And he didn't have a key when he went to check the trunk, so it couldn't be locked. So I pretended to stare at something on the side of the road. "Is that a dead deer?" I said. The stranger looked out my window and, as I had hoped, slowed the car down. "I wonder," he said. "Stay here." Not fucking likely. He got out of the car and began making his way into the trees. He seemed to be making his way to a dark lump in the forest, a few hundred feet away. Probably a log, but it could be mistaken for an animal with suggestion and darkness. I waited a few seconds, letting him get far enough away. Then I opened up the glove box and drew the pistol. Then I slowly and carefully opened the car door, making as little noise as I humanly could. The door unlatched, making a thump noise. I trained my gaze on his round figure, but he didn't seem to notice. I then carefully tiptoed around the side of the car, treading lightly in the hopes of not crunching dirt under my feet. I felt in my pocket, and sure enough, my phone was still there. My plan was to snap a picture, then steal the car. If I had to, I would shoot the stranger. I looked at the gun and turned the safety off. I didn't know how to check if it was loaded, so I just hoped. Then, standing in front of the trunk, I reached for the handle. Dirt crunched behind me, and I whirled around, extending my arm in the direction of the noise, gun ready. The stranger stood with his arms clasped behind his back, his face shrouded in darkness. He gave a chuckle as dark as his features. "So, boy, you seem to be the curious type. Ain't your mother ever told you to refrain from nosiness?" I gulped and placed my finger on the trigger. "Stay back," I said. "I don't know what you're doing or what's in that trunk, but you better stay the fuck away from me," the stranger tisked. "Such profane language, son. What do you plan on doing with that weapon of yours? Shoot me? You ain't got the nerve. Not to mention you don't know anything about what's in that trunk. You'll be charged as a murderer." He took a step closer, illuminating his face just a tad bit more. His eyes glistened like fish eggs, boring holes into me with their fierce, murderous look. His smile was less that of friendliness, and more like a wolf baring its teeth at its prey. Just before the kill, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a switchblade. "Now, boy, why don't you hop back into the car and we forget this nonsense about me being a killer? That sound good?" And then my stomach nodded several times over as it realized something. Something very important. "I never accused you of being a killer," I said. "Why would you say that?" His smile became a scowl, and he took another step closer. "Get back. In the car, boy. You have no idea what you're dealing with." I stepped back, pressing my hand onto the cool metal of the trunk, finding solace in its cold embrace. I then pointed the gun at the stranger and said what I always wanted to be my final words. "Fuck off." He cracked his neck like a fistfighter would, and then lurched forward. I pulled the trigger. The muzzle of the pistol erupted in a bright flare, and the stranger grabbed his stomach, dropping his knife. He collapsed forward, head hitting the ground at my feet. He gasped and blood began to pool around his body. I looked at him for a good 10 minutes. Then, very slowly, I turned around, my hand still resting on the trunk. I dropped the gun, placing my other hand inside the groove of the trunk handle. My fingers wrapped around the plastic of the handle. Slowly, they pulled towards me, bringing the handle with it. The latch released with a thunk. I grabbed my phone from my pocket, pressing the photo app. Then, aimed at the trunk, I slowly swung it open. The hinges squeaked slightly as they finished their rotation. The lights on either side of the trunk coated my body in a crimson red, and inside the trunk was something. Something that would condemn me for all my life in the cell of a prison. Something that would leave me burning in the deepest pits of hell for all eternity. It was something that proved me wrong, and proved to the cops that I was a killer with no redemption. And maybe I was. Because in that trunk there was nothing more than a deer carcass and a shotgun. He was a hunter. I had killed an innocent man.
As my date, Harvey Harvard, brags about his alma mater and Manhattan penthouse, I take a bite of overpriced kale and watch his ugly thoughts swirl overhead. It's hard to pay attention to him, with my stomach growling and my body a jitter, for all he's easy on the eyes. Harvey doesn't look much older than I am, but his thoughts, covered in spines and centipede feet, glisten with ancient grudges and carry an entitled Ivy League stink. "My apartment has the most amazing view of the city," he's saying, his thoughts sliding long over each other like dark bristling snakes. Each one is as thick around as his Rolex-draped wrist. "I just installed a jacuzzi along the west wall so that I can watch the sunset while I relax after getting back from the gym." I nod, half listening to the words coming out of his mouth. I'm much more interested in the ones hissing through the teeth of the thoughts above him. She's got perfect tits, lil handfuls just waiting to be squeezed. I love me some perky tits. I'm gonna fuck this bitch so hard she'll never walk straight again. Gross. "That sounds wonderful," I say, as I sip champagne and gaze at him through my false eyelashes, hoping the dim screen of my iPhone isn't visible through the tablecloth below. This dude is boring as hell, and I'm already back on Tinder, thumbing through next week's prospective dinner dates. She's so into me, She'll be begging for it by the end of the night. I can't wait to cut her up. My eyes flick up sharply. "I'm sorry," I say. Harvey blinks. I said, "Argentina is a beautiful country. Pretty little thing. She'll look so good spread out all over the floor." "Right," I say. "Of course." Blood's pulsing through my head so hard, it probably looks like I've got a wicked blush. I'm so excited. I'm half hard already. You and me both, I think, turning my iPhone off and smiling my prettiest smile. The waiter swings by with another bottle of champagne and a dessert menu burned into a wooden card, but I wave him off. "Dinner's been lovely," I whisper to Harvey, leaning in and kissing his cheek. "But I've got a different kind of dessert in mind." Ah, go the ugly thoughts, settling into a gentle rippling wave across his shoulders. I'm going to take her home and split her all the way from top to bottom, like a fucking fruit tart. That is not the way I normally eat fruit tarts, but who am I to judge? I passed on dessert after all. When he pays the bill, he can't stop grinning at me. Neither can the ugly thoughts hissing and cackling behind his ear. "What's got you so happy?" I ask coyly. "I'm just excited to spend the rest of the evening with you," he replies. The fucker has his own parking spot. No taxis for us. He's even brought the Tesla. The leather seats smell buttery and sweet, and as I slide in and make myself comfortable, the rankness of his thoughts leaves a stain in the air. It's enough to leave me lightheaded, almost purring. As we cruise uptown toward his fancy-ass penthouse, I ask him to pull over near the Queensboro Bridge for a second. Annoyance flashes across his face, but he parks the Tesla in a side street. I lurch into an alley, tottering over empty cans and discarded cigarettes in my 4-inch heels, and puke a trail of champagne and kale over to the dumpster shoved up against the apartment building. "Are you all right?" Harvey calls. "I'm fine," I slur. Not a single curious window opens overhead. His steps echo down the alley. He's gotten out of the car, and he's walking toward me like I'm an animal that he needs to approach carefully. Maybe I should do it now. Yes, now, while the bitch is occupied. But what about the method? I won't get to see her insides all pretty everywhere. I launch myself at him, fingers digging sharp into his body, and bite down hard on his mouth. He tries to shout, but I swallow the sound and shove my tongue inside. There, just behind his teeth, is what I'm looking for. Ugly thoughts, viscous as boiled tendon. I suck them howling and fighting into my throat as Harvey's body shudders, little mewling noises escaping from his nose. I feel decadent and filthy, swollen with the cruelest dreams I've ever tasted. I can barely feel Harvey's feeble struggles. In this state, with the darkest parts of himself drained from his mouth into mine, he's no match for me. They're never as strong as they think they are. By the time he finally goes limp, the last of the thoughts disappearing down my throat, my body's already changing. My limbs elongate, growing thicker, and my dress feels too tight as my ribs expand. I'll have to work quickly. I strip off my clothes with practiced ease, struggling a little to work the bodice free of the gym-toned musculature swelling under my skin. It doesn't take much time to wrestle Harvey out of his clothes either. My hands are shaking but strong, and as I button up his shirt around me and shrug on his jacket, my jaw is creaked into an approximation of his, and the ridges of my fingerprints have reshaped themselves completely. Harvey is so much bigger than me, and the expansion of space eases the pressure on my boiling belly, stuffed with ugly thoughts as it is. I stuff my discarded outfit into my purse, my high heels clicking against the empty glass jar at its bottom, and sling the strap over my now broad shoulder. I kneel to check Harvey's pulse, slow but steady, before rolling his unconscious body up against the dumpster, covering him with trash bags. Maybe he'll wake up, maybe he won't. Not my problem, as long as he doesn't wake in the next 10 seconds to see his doppelganger strolling out of the alley, wearing his clothes and fingering his wallet and the keys to his Tesla. There's a cluster of drunk college kids gawking at Harvey's car. I level an arrogant stare at them. Oh, but do I wear this body so much better than he did? And they scatter. I might not have a license, but Harvey's body remembers how to drive. The Tesla revs sweetly under me, but I ditch it in a parking garage in Bedford, stripping in the relative privacy of the second to highest level. Edged behind a pillar, after laying the keys on the driver's seat over Harvey's neatly folded clothes and shutting the car door, I pull the glass jar from my purse and vomit into it as quietly as I can. Black liquid, thick and viscous, hits the bottom of the jar, hissing and snarling Harvey's words. My body shudders, limbs retracting, spine reshaping itself as I empty myself of him. It takes a few more minutes to ease back into an approximation of myself, at least enough to slip my dress and heels back on, pocket the jar, and comb my tangled hair out with my fingers. The parking attendant nods at me as I walk out of the garage, his eyes sliding disinterested over me, his thoughts a gray, indistinct murmur. The L train takes me back home to Bushwick, and when I push open the apartment door, Aiko is in the kitchen, rolling mochi paste out on the counter. "You're here," I say stupidly. I'm still a little foggy from shaking off Harvey's form, and strains of his thoughts linger in me, setting my blood humming uncomfortably hot. "I'd hope so. You invited me over." She hasn't changed out of her catering company clothes, and her short, sleek hair frames her face, aglow in the kitchen light. Not a single ugly thought casts its shadow across the stove behind her. "Did you forget again?" "No," I lie, kicking my shoes off at the door. "I totally would never do something like that." "Have you been here long?" "About an hour, nothing unusual. The doorman let me in, and I kept your spare key." She smiles briefly, soft compared to the brusque movements of her hands. She's got flour on her rolled-up sleeves, and my heart flutters the way it never does when I'm out hunting. "I'm guessing your date was pretty shit. You probably wouldn't have come home at all if it had gone well." "You could say that." I reach into my purse and stash the snarling jar in the fridge, where it clatters against the others, nearly a dozen bottles of malignant leftovers labeled as health drinks. Aiko nods to her right. "I brought you some pastries from the event tonight. They're in the paper bag on the counter." "You're an angel." I edge past her so I don't make bodily contact. Aiko thinks I have touch issues, but the truth is she smells like everything good in the world, solid and familiar, both light and heavy at the same time, and it's enough to drive a person mad. "He should have bought you a cab back at least," says Aiko, reaching for a bowl of red bean paste. I fiddle with the bag of pastries, pretending to select something from its contents. "I swear, it's like you're a magnet for terrible dates." She's not wrong. I'm very careful about who I court. After all, that's how I stay fed. But no one in the past has been as delicious, as hideously depraved as Harvey. No one else has been a killer. I'm going to take her home and split her all the way from top to bottom. "Maybe I'm too weird," I say. "You're probably too normal. Only socially maladjusted creeps use Tinder." "Gee, thanks," I complain. She grins, flicking a bit of red bean paste at me. I lick it off of my arm. "You know what I mean. Come visit my church with me sometime, yeah? There are plenty of nice boys there." "The dating scene in this city depresses me," I mutter, flicking open my Tinder app with my thumb. "I'll pass." "Come on, Jen, put that away." Aiko hesitates. "Your mom called while you were out. She wants you to move back to Flushing." She's not wrong. I'm very careful about who I court. After all, that's how I stay fed. But no one in the past has been as delicious, as hideously depraved as Harvey. No one else has been a killer. I'm going to take her home and split her all the way from top to bottom. "Maybe I'm too weird," I say. "You're probably too normal. Only socially maladjusted creeps use Tinder." "Gee, thanks," I complain. She grins, flicking a bit of red bean paste at me. I lick it off of my arm. "You know what I mean. Come visit my church with me sometime, yeah? There are plenty of nice boys there." "The dating scene in this city depresses me," I mutter, flicking open my Tinder app with my thumb. "I'll pass." "Come on, Jen, put that away." Aiko hesitates. "Your mom called while you were out. She wants you to move back to Flushing." I bark out a short, sharp laugh, my good mood evaporating. "What else is new?" "She's getting old," Aiko says, "and she's lonely." I bet. All her mahjong partners are dead, pretty much. I can imagine her in her little apartment in Flushing, huddled over her laptop, floral curtains pulled tight over the windows to shut out the rest of the world. My ma, whose apartment walls are alive with hissing, covered in the ugly bottled remains of her paramours. Aiko sighs, joining me at the counter and leaning back against me. For once, I don't move away. Every muscle in my body is tense, straining. I'm afraid I might catch fire, but I don't want her to leave. Would it kill you to be kind to her? I think about my Baba evaporating into thin air when I was 5 years old, what was left of him coiled in my ma's stomach. "Are you telling me to go back?" She doesn't say anything for a bit. "No," she says at last. "That place isn't good for you. That house isn't good for anyone. Just a few inches away, An army of jars full of black, viscous liquid wait in the fridge, their contents muttering to themselves. Aiko can't hear them, but each slosh against the glass is a low, nasty hiss. Who does she think she is? The fucking cunt should have got her when I had the chance. I can still feel Harvey, his malice and ugly joy, on my tongue. I'm already full of things my ma gave me. I'm glad we agree. Over the next few weeks, I gorge myself on the pickup artists and grad students populating the Saint. Mark's hipster bars, but nothing tastes good after Harvey. Their watery essences, squeezed from their owners with barely a whimper of protest, barely coat my stomach. Sometimes I take too much. I scrape them dry and leave them empty, shaking their forms off like rainwater when I'm done. I tell Aiko, I've been partying when she says I look haggard. She tells me to quit drinking so much, her face impassive, her thoughts clouded with concern. She starts coming over more often, even cooking dinner for me, and her presence both grounds me and drives me mad. I'm worried about you, she says as I lie on the floor, flipping listlessly through pages of online dating profiles, looking for the emptiness, the rot, that made Harvey so appealing. She's cooking my mom's lo mein recipe, the oily smell making my skin itch. You've lost so much weight and there's nothing in your fridge, just a bunch of empty jam jars. I don't tell her that Harvey's lies under my bed, that I lick its remnants every night to send my nerves back into euphoria. I don't tell her how often I dream about my ma's place, the shelves of jars she never let me touch. Is it really okay for you to spend so much time away from your catering business? I say instead. Time is money, and Jimmy gets pissy when he has to make all the desserts without you. Aiko sets a bowl of lo mein in front of me and joins me on the ground. There's nowhere I'd rather be than here, she says, and a dangerous, luminous sweetness blooms in my chest. But the hunger grows worse every day, and soon I can't trust myself around her. I deadbolt the door, and when she stops by my apartment to check on me, I refuse to let her in. Texts light up my phone like a fleet of fireworks as I huddle under a blanket on the other side, my face pressed against the wood, my fingers twitching. Please, Jen, I don't understand, she says from behind the door. Did I do something wrong? I can't wait to cut her up, I think, and hate myself even more. By the time Aiko leaves, her footsteps echoing down the hallway, I've dug deep gouges in the door's paint with my nails and teeth, my mouth full of her intoxicating scent. My ma's apartment in Flushing still smells the same. She's never been a clean person, and the sheer amount of junk stacked up everywhere has increased since I left home for good. Piles of newspapers, old food containers, and stuffed toys make it hard to push the door open, and the stench makes me cough. Her hoard is up to my shoulders, even higher in some places, and as I pick my way through it, the sounds that colored my childhood grow louder. The constant whine of a Taiwanese soap opera, bleeding past mountains of trash, and the cruel cacophony of many familiar voices. Touch me again, and I swear I'll kill you. How many times have I told you not to wash the clothes like that? Open your mouth. Hope her ugly chink daughter isn't home tonight. Under the refuse she's hoarded, the walls are honeycombed with shelves, lined with what's left of my ma's lovers. She keeps them like disgusting, mouth-watering trophies, desires pickling in stomach acid and bile. I could probably call them by name if I wanted to. When I was a kid, I used to lie on the couch and watch my Baba's ghosts flicker across their surfaces. My ma's huddled in the kitchen, the screen of her laptop casting a sickly blue glow on her face. Her thoughts cover her quietly like a blanket. I made some new romien, she says. It's on the stove. Your Baba's in there. My stomach curls, but whether it's from revulsion or hunger, I can't tell. Thanks, Ma, I say. I find a bowl that's almost clean and wash it out, ladling a generous portion of thick noodles for myself. The broth smells faintly of Hong Tash and tobacco, and as I force it down almost faster than I can swallow, someone else's memories of my childhood flash before my eyes. Pushing a small girl on a swing set at the park, laughing as she chases pigeons down the street, raising a hand for a second blow as her mother launches herself toward us, between us, teeth bared. How is it? She says. Foul. Great, I say. It settles my stomach, at least for a little while. But my Baba was no Harvey, and I can already feel the hunger creeping back, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. You ate something you shouldn't have, didn't you, Mei Mei? My ma looks up at me for the first time since I walked in, and she looks almost as tired as I feel. Why didn't you learn from me? I taught you to stick to petty criminals. I taught you to stay invisible. She'd tried to teach me to disappear into myself, the way she'd disappeared into this apartment. I know I messed up, I tell her. Nothing tastes good anymore, and I'm always hungry, but I don't know what to do. My ma sighs. Once you've tasted a killer, there's no turning back. You'll crave that intensity until you die, and it can take a long time for someone like us to die, Mei Mei. It occurs to me that I don't actually know how old my ma is. Her thoughts are old and covered in knots, stitched together from the remnants of other people's experiences. How long has she been fighting this condition? These overwhelming, gnawing desires? Move back in, she's saying. There's so much Tong activity here, the streets leak with food. You barely even have to go outside. Just crack open a window and you can smell it brewing. The malice, the knives and bullets. The picture she paints makes me shudder, my mouth itching. I can't just leave everything, Ma, I say. I have my own life now. And I can't live in this apartment, with its lack of sunlight and fresh air, its thick stench of regret and malice. So what happens if you go back? You lose control? You take a bite out of Aiko? She sees me stiffen. That girl cares about you so much. The best thing you can do for her is keep away. Don't let what happened to your father happen to Aiko. She reaches for my hand, and I pull away. Stay here, Mei Mei. We only have each other. This isn't what I want. I'm backing up, and my shoulder bumps into the trash, threatening to bury us both in rotting stuffed animals. This isn't safe, Ma. You shouldn't even stay here. My ma coughs, her eyes glinting in the dark. The cackling from her jar collection swells in a vicious tide, former lovers rocking back and forth on their shelves. Someday you'll learn that there's more to life than being selfish, Mei Mei. That's when I turn my back on her, pushing past the debris and bullshit her apartment's stuffed with. I don't want to die, but as far as I'm concerned, living like my ma, sequestered away from the rest of the world, her doors barricaded with heaps of useless trinkets and soured memories, is worse than being dead. The jars leer and cackle as I go, and she doesn't try to follow me. The scent of Flushing clings to my skin, and I can't wait to shake it off. I get on the train as soon as I can, and I'm back on Tinder as soon as the M passes above ground. Tears blur my eyes, rattling free with the movement of the train. I scrub them away angrily, and when my vision clears, I glance back at the screen. A woman with sleek dark hair, slim tortoiseshell glasses, and a smile that seems a little shy, but strangely handsome, glows up at me. In the picture, she's framed by the downtown cityscape. She has rounded cheeks, but there's a strange flat quality to her face. And then, of course, there are the dreams shadowing her, so strong they leak from the screen in a thick, heady miasma. Every one of those myriad eyes is staring straight at me, and my skin prickles. Her name is Seo Yun, and as she watches me eat, her eyes flickering from my mouth to my throat, her smile is so sharp I could cut myself on it. I love places like this, she says. Little authentic spots with only 12 seats. Have you been to Haru before? I haven't, I murmur. My fingers are clumsy with my chopsticks, tremors clicking them together, making it hard to pick up my food. God, she smells delectable. I've never met someone whose mind is so twisted, so rich. A malignancy as well developed and finely crafted as the most elegant dessert. Her name is Seo Yun, and as she watches me eat, her eyes flickering from my mouth to my throat, her smile is so sharp I could cut myself on it. I love places like this, she says. Little authentic spots with only 12 seats. Have you been to Haru before? I haven't, I murmur. My fingers are clumsy with my chopsticks, tremors clicking them together, making it hard to pick up my food. God, she smells delectable. I've never met someone whose mind is so twisted, so rich. A malignancy as well developed and finely crafted as the most elegant dessert. I'm going to take her home and split her open like I can already taste her on my tongue, the best meal I've never had. You're in for a treat, Seo Yun says, as the waiter, the only other staff beside the chef behind the counter, brings us another pot of tea. This restaurant started as a stall in a subway station back in Japan. Oh wow, I say, that's Dot. Amazing. I think so too. I'm glad they expanded into Manhattan. Behind her kind eyes, a gnarled mess of ancient ugly thoughts writhes like the tails of a rat king. I've never seen so many in one place. They crawl from her mouth and ears, creeping through the air on deep-scaled legs, their voices like the drone of descending locusts. I'm not her first. I can tell that already. But then, She isn't mine either. I spend the evening sweating through my dress, nearly dropping my chopsticks. I can't stop staring at the ugly thoughts, dropping from her lips like swollen beetles. They skitter over the tablecloth toward me, whispering obscenities at odds with Seo Yoon's gentle voice, hissing what they'd like to do to me. It takes everything in me not to pluck them from the table and crunch them deep between my teeth right then and there, to pour into her lap and rip her mind clean. Seo Yoon is too much for me, but I'm in too far, too hard. I need to have her. She smiles at me. Not hungry? I glance down at my plate. I've barely managed a couple of nigiri. I'm on a diet, I mutter. I understand, she says earnestly. The ugly thoughts crawl over the tops of her hands, iridescent drops spilling into her soy sauce dish. When the waiter finally disappears into the kitchen, I move in to kiss her across the table. She makes a startled noise, gentle pink spreading across her face. But she doesn't pull away. My elbow sinks into the exoskeleton of one of the thought beetles, crushing it into black, moist paste against my skin. I open my mouth to take the first bite. So, I'm curious, murmurs Seo Yoon, her breath brushing my lips. Who's Aiko? My eyes snap open. Seo Yoon smiles, her voice warm and tender, all her edges dark. She seems sweet, that's all. I'm surprised you haven't had a taste of her yet. I back up so fast that I knock over my teacup, spilling scalding tea over everything. But Seo Yoon doesn't move, just keeps smiling that kind, gentle smile as her monstrous thoughts lap delicately at the tablecloth. She smells so ripe, she whispers, but you're afraid you'll ruin her, aren't you? Eat her up, and for what? Just like your mom did your dad. No. I've miscalculated so badly. But I'm so hungry, and I'm too young, and she smells like ancient power. There's no way I'll be able to outrun her. Get out of my head, I manage to say. I'm not in your head, love. Your thoughts are spilling out everywhere around you, for everyone to see. She leans in, propping her chin on her hand. The thoughts twisted around her head like a living crown, let out a dry, rattling laugh. I like you, Jenny. You're ambitious. A little careless, but we can fix that. Seo Yoon taps on the table, and the waiter reappears, folding up the tablecloth deftly and sliding a single dish onto the now bare table. An array of thin, translucent slices fan out across the plate, pale and glistening with malice. Bisected eyes glint, mouths caught mid-snarl from every piece. All it takes is a little practice and discipline, and no one will know what you're really thinking. On the house, of course, ma'am, the waiter murmurs. Before he disappears again, I catch a glimpse of dark, many-legged thoughts braided like a bracelet around his wrist. Seo Yoon takes the first bite, glancing up at me from behind her glasses. Your mum was wrong, she says. She thought you were alone, just the two of you. So she taught you to only eat when you needed to, so you didn't get caught, biding your time between meals like a snake. You don't know anything about me, I say. The heady, rotten perfume from the dish in front of me makes my head spin with hunger. My mum was much the same. Eat for survival, not for pleasure. She gestures at the plate with her chopsticks. Please, have some. As the food disappears, I can only hold out for a few more slices before my chopsticks dart out, catching a piece for myself. It's so acidic it makes my tongue burn and eyes itch, the aftertaste strangely sweet. Do you like it? I respond by wolfing down another 2 slices, and Seo Yoon chuckles. Harvey is bland compared to this strangely distilled pairing of emotions. I gasp as my body starts to warp, hands withering, burn scars twisting their way around my arms. Gasoline, malice, childish joy rush through me, a heady mix of memory and sensory overstimulation. And then Seo Yoon's lips are on mine, teeth tugging gently, swallowing, drawing it out of me. The burns fade, but the tingle of cruel euphoria lingers. She wipes her mouth delicately. Ate a little too fast, I think, dear, she says. My point, Jenny, is that I believe in eating for pleasure, not just survival, and communally, of course. There are a number of us who get together for dinner or drinks at my place every so often. And I would love it if you would join us tonight. An eating club of sorts. My gaze flickers up at her thoughts, but they're sitting still as stones, just watching me with unblinking eyes. My mouth stings with the imprint of hers. Let me introduce you soon. You don't have to be alone anymore. As the waiter clears the plate and nods at her, no check, no receipt, nothing, Seo Yoon adds, and tonight doesn't have to be over until we want it to be. She offers me her hand. After a moment's hesitation, I take it. It's smaller than mine, and warm. Yes, please, I say, watching her thoughts instead of her face. As we leave the restaurant, she presses her lips to my forehead. Her lips sear into my skin, nerves singing white-hot with ecstasy. They're going to love you, she says. We'll have so much fun, say the thoughts curling through her dark hair. She hails a cab from the fleet circling the street like wolves, and we get inside. I run into Aiko 2 months later in front of my apartment as I'm carrying the last box of my stuff out. She's got a startled look on her face, and she's carrying a bag stuffed with ramps, kaffir lime, heart of palm, all ingredients I wouldn't have known 2 months ago before meeting Seo Yoon. You're moving? I shrug, staring over her head, avoiding her eyes. Yeah, I'm seeing someone now, and she's got a really nice place. Oh, she swallows, shifts the bag of groceries higher on her hip. That's great! I didn't know you were dating anybody. I can hear her shaky smile. She must be feeding you well. You look healthier. Thanks, I say, though I wonder. It's true, I'm sleeker, more confident now. I'm barely home anymore, spending most of my time in Seo Yoon's Chelsea apartment, learning to cook with the array of salts and spices infused with ugly dreams, drinking wine distilled from deathbed confessions. My time stalking the streets for small-time criminals is done. But why has my confidence evaporated the moment I see Aiko? And if that ravenous hunger from Harvey is gone, why am I holding my breath to keep from breathing in her scent? So what's she like? Older, kind of looks like you. Short, likes to cook, right? I start to edge past her. Listen, this box is heavy, and the van's waiting for me downstairs. I should go. Wait, Aiko says, grabbing my arm. Your mom keeps calling me. She still has my number from before. She's worried about you. Plus, I haven't seen you in ages, and you're just gonna take off? Aiko, small and humble. Her hands smell like home, like rice flour and bad memories. How could I ever have found that appealing? We don't need to say goodbye. I'm sure I'll see you later, I lie, shrugging her off. Let's get dinner sometime, says Aiko, but I'm already walking away. Caterers flit like blackbirds through the apartment, dark uniforms neatly pressed, their own ugly thoughts braided and pinned out of the way. It's a 2-story affair, and well-dressed people flock together everywhere there's space. Seo Yoon's library upstairs to the living room on ground floor. She's even asked the caterers to prepare some of my recipes, which makes my heart glow. You're the best, I say, kneeling on the bed beside her and pecking her on the cheek. Seo Yoon smiles, fixing my hair. She wears a sleek, deep blue dress, and today, her murderous thoughts are draped over her shoulders like a stole, a living, writhing cape. Their teeth glitter like tiny diamonds. I've never seen her so beautiful. They're good recipes. My friends will be so excited to taste them. I've already met many of them, all much older than I am. They make me nervous. I'll go check on the food, I say. She brushes her thumb over my cheek. Whatever you'd like, love. Whatever. I escape into the kitchen, murmuring brief greetings to the guests I encounter on the way. Their hideous dreams adorn them like jewels, glimmering and snatching at me as I slip past. As I walk past some of the cooks, I notice a man who looks vaguely familiar. Hey, I say. Yes, ma'am. The caterer turns around, and I realize where I've seen him. There's a picture of him and Aiko on her cell phone, the pair of them posing in front of a display at a big event they'd cooked for. My heartbeat slows. Aren't you Aiko's co-worker? He grins and nods. Yes, I'm Jimmy. Aiko's my business partner. Are you looking for her? Wait, she's here? He frowns. She should be. She never misses one of Miss Sun's parties. He smiles. Miss Sun lets us take home whatever's left when the party winds down. She's so generous. I turn abruptly and head for the staircase to the bedroom, shouldering my way through the crowd. Thoughts pelt me as I go. Has Aiko known about me, my ma, what we can do? How long has she known? And worse, Seo Yoon's known all along about Aiko and played me for a fool. I bang the bedroom door open to find Aiko sprawled out across the carpet, her jacket torn open. Seo Yoon crouches on the floor above her in her glorious dress, her mouth dark and glittering. She doesn't look at all surprised to see me. Jenny, love, I hope you don't mind we started without you. Seo Yoon smiles. Her lipstick is smeared over her chin, over Aiko's blank face. I can't tell if Aiko's still breathing. Get away from her, I say in a low voice. As you wish. She rises gracefully, crossing the room in fluid strides. I was done with that particular morsel anyway. The sounds of the party leak into the room behind me, and I know I can't run and grab Aiko at the same time, so I shut the door, locking it, and mellow my voice to a sweet purr. Why didn't you tell me about Aiko? We could have shared her together. But Seo-yoon just laughs at me. You can't fool me, Jenny. I can smell your rage from across the room. She reaches out, catches my face, and I recoil into the door. It makes you so beautiful. The last seasoning in a dish almost ready. You're insane, and I'm going to kill you, I say. She kisses my neck, her teeth scraping my throat, and the scent of her is so heady, my knees almost bend. I saw you in her head, delicious as anything, she whispers. Her ugly thoughts hiss up my arms, twining around my waist. There's a sharp sting at my wrist, and I look down to discover that one of them is already gnawing at my skin. And I knew I just had to have you. There's a crash, and Seo-yoon screams as a porcelain lamp shatters against the back of her head. Aiko's on her feet, swaying unsteadily, face grim. Back the fuck away from her, she growls, her voice barely above a whisper. You little bitch, snarls Seo-yoon. But I seize my chance and pounce, fastening my teeth into the hollow of Seo-yoon's throat. Right where her mantle of thoughts gathers and folds inward, I chew and swallow, gorging myself on this woman. Her thoughts are mine now, thrashing as I seize them from her, and I catch glimpses of myself, of Aiko, and of many others just like us, in various states of disarray, of preparation. Ma once told me that this was how Baba went. She'd accidentally drained him until he'd faded completely out of existence. For the first time in my life, I understand her completely. Seo-yoon's bracelets clatter to the floor, her empty gown fluttering soundlessly after. Aiko collapses too, folding like paper. It hurts to take in that much. My stomach hurts so bad, my entire body swollen with hideous thoughts. At the same time, I've never felt so alive, abuzz with possibility and untamable rage. I lurch over to Aiko on the floor, malice leaking from her mouth, staining the carpet. Aiko, wake up! But she feels hollow, lighter, empty. She doesn't even smell like herself anymore. A knock at the door jolts me. Ma'am, says a voice I recognize as the head caterer. The first of the main courses is ready. Mr. Goldberg wants to know if you'll come down and give a toast. Fuck. I start to say, but the voice isn't mine. I glance over at the mirror. Sure enough, it's Seo-yoon staring back at me, her dark, terrible dreams tangled around her body in a knotted mess. I'll be right there, I say, and lay Aiko gently on the bed. Then I dress and leave, my heart pounding in my mouth. I walk Seo-yoon's shape down the stairs to the dining room, where guests are milling about, plates in hand, and smile Seo-yoon's smile. And if I look a little too much like myself, well, according to what I'd seen while swallowing Seo-yoon's thoughts, I wouldn't be the first would-be inductee to disappear at a party like this. Someone hands me a glass of wine, and when I take it, my hand doesn't tremble, even though I'm screaming inside. 50 pairs of eyes on me, the caterers glittering cold in the shadows. Do any of them know? Can any of them tell? To your continued health and to a fabulous dinner, I say, raising my glass. As one, they drink. Seo-yoon's apartment is dark, cleared of guests and waitstaff alike. Every door is locked, every curtain yanked closed. I've pulled every jar, every container, every pot and pan out of the kitchen, and now they cover the floor of the bedroom, trailing into the hallway, down the stairs. Many are full, their malignant contents hissing and whispering hideous promises at me as I stuff my hand in my mouth, retching into the pot in my lap. Aiko lies on the bed, pale and still. There's flour and bile on the front of her jacket. Hang in there, I whisper, but she doesn't respond. I swirl the pot, searching its contents for any hint of Aiko, but Seo-yoon's face grins out at me from the patterns of light glimmering across the liquid surface. I shove it away from me, spilling some on the carpet. I grab another one of the myriad crawling thoughts tangled about me, sinking my teeth into its body, tearing it into pieces as it screams and howls terrible promises. Promises it won't be able to keep. I eat it raw, its scales scraping the roof of my mouth, chewing it thoroughly. The more broken down it is, the easier it will be to sort through the pieces that are left when it comes back up. How long did you know? Did you always know? I'll find her, I think, as viscous black liquid pours from my mouth, over my hands, burning my throat. The field of containers pools around me like a storm of malicious stars, all whispering my name. She's in here somewhere. I can see her reflection darting across their surfaces. If I have to rip through every piece of Seo Yoon I have, from her dreams to the soft, freckled skin wrapped around my body, I will. I'll wring every vile drop of Seo Yoon out of me until I find Aiko, and then I'll fill her back up, pour her mouth full of herself. How could I ever forget her? How could I forget her taste, her scent? Something as awful and beautiful as home.
Well, time surely does fly. It's already been 40 years since my wonderful stay in Auschwitz. To my surprise, I'm not horribly tormented by the memories of that putrid hellhole of a prison, like most people I've come to know during the time. Well, at least not anymore. Probably because in my perspective, it's best to forget. Well, not exactly forget, so to say, but rather to just make the best of everything with the life I still have. It will never be the same again, but at the very least, I still have one. I mean, for Christ's sake, I stared right into the malevolent eyes of death itself, with calm but cherishing smiles. When you're faced with an army of Nazi soldiers guarding the camp, pointing MP40s at you with bullets with your name on it, you tend to try to remain calm, do as you are told, and hope for the best. To my surprise, it worked. Although, I don't know what worked more, the fact that I always remained calm, or whatever monstrosity that intervened that some claimed to be a rogue angel. After the war ended, I moved to the US, hoping to get my mind off of this whole experience. A typical man's life story short. I was happily married, had 2 kids, Ellie and Jonathan, and then a divorce, lost custody, and now have a whole house to myself while I drown in alcohol. Hell, if you thought what happened during the war traumatized me, well, allow me to be straightforward, it didn't. Why? Well, it's quite simple. I never had any attachment to any of my fellow prisoners. I always kept to myself, followed the guard's instructions, and never allowed any emotional connection with anyone. I know that sounds really callous, but during the time, you had to keep yourself numb and pray to God that you would survive. As cold as this sounds, I had nothing to lose. Every man for himself, I guess. As I drank a glass of scotch that I've longed for since the time of day, I received a call from someone I wasn't familiar with. As I finished the last bit of my drink, I answered. "Hello, Mr. Bernstein?" asked the unknown caller. "Who is this?" "My name is Daniel. I just need to ask you something." I did not have the energy to ask how he got my number or how he knew my name, so I complied. "All right," I said in a tired, irritated voice. "Listen, I am working on a book about survivors like you, and I was wondering—" I vaguely interrupted him as I knew what this was about. "Let me guess. You want an interview with me about my story during the Holocaust, am I correct? Buy best-selling books online. Why, yes, sir, if that's okay for me to ask." I sighed heavily, rubbing my eyes from bitter annoyance, and told him my address. "Go ahead and come in tonight." "Are you sure?" he asked. "I have nothing else to do." "Go ahead." I hung up. I could tell he was an anxious young man who aspired to get my story out there. This isn't the first time I've been asked for an interview, and it's certainly not going to be the last. Over the years, I never complied with anyone. Not that I was uncomfortable, but there was just nothing to tell. I learned to burn those memories away and to simply move on from whatever hells I have witnessed. Besides, whatever I have to say, he probably has heard it before, so why not just get this interview over with? About 2 hours later, he arrived on my doorstep. I let him in without him knocking. He took his hat off and politely said, "Hello, Mr. Bernstein. I'm Daniel Adams. Pleased to meet you." He held his hand out for a handshake. Likewise, I replied. I welcomed him into my home and led him into my office. He was dressed quite nicely, I should add. He had an obvious smile on his face as if this was his first interview for his new book. His smile faded away instantly when he noticed my personal library. He began to shake a little when he hesitantly asked me, "So, you're studying demonology? The occult?" I turned around and embarrassingly chuckled. Yes, just personal research. Behind my dusty desk sat a massive crimson shelf filled with books, journals, and documents about the occult and the nature of the paranormal. On the wall beside the shelf was pinned a little old sketch of a blurry monster I made several years ago. Buy best-selling books online? He nervously smiled as he pulled out his pen and paper. I apologize if this makes you uncomfortable, I said. We can go in another room if you like. Oh, no judgment here, he replied as he scratched his head nervously, smiling. It's just a little unexpected to see that many books about demonology in one room. Before I could speak, he stared down to the ground like he was ashamed. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked. I leaned towards him and said, I'm normally not a patient man, but you're young and have a lot to learn, so I'll let that slide. He looked up at me and revealed that nervous smile once more, ready to write. I asked, So, what do you want to know? Buy best-selling books online. How did you feel during the time? Again, his eyes lingered upon the ground, ashamed of his question. I gently placed my hand on his shoulder. Son, it's okay. What happened was a long time ago. Feel free to ask me any question you like, okay? He looked upwards with a distant smile, regaining focus. All right, to answer your question, I didn't know what to feel. I cleared my throat. To tell you the truth, I was numb the entire time I was there. The horrible things the Germans didn't affect you? He asked in a voice more concerned than confused. At first, they did. Mostly when I was in the departure train on the way there. What was that like? It was treacherous. There were at least 30 of us in one car for 5 days. Very little rations and water, no bathroom, not even a little porthole-sized window to look through. Almost complete darkness every day and night. It was during the winter as well, and with the little clothing I had on, I hardly slept at night. During the day, I say I got an hour total because the rest of the hopeless prisoners moaned in disbelief that we were here. I heard a few choke out as their lives slowly faded away from dehydration. I always hid in the corner with my knees tucked against my chest. Hearing all these haunting wails screaming for death to come and take us all, I remained silent as I drifted into the corner. I think that was the first time I cried as well. I took a deep breath after I spoke. Mistaking my tone for discomfort, Daniel asked me, "Are you okay, Mr. Bernstein?" "Yeah, I'm okay, I just need a drink." I cleared my throat again. Anyways, it was horrifying, but the only reason why I'm still alive is because I always kept to myself. If a guard gave me an order, well, if you were smart, you did what he said, or you would be shot or worse. Daniel was puzzled. What do you mean worse? I poured another glass of scotch before I spoke. You see, the Nazis were ruthless. When you're in the camp as a prisoner, they could not give 2 shits about you. To them, you're a waste of skin, God's mistake, made for disposal. They completely disregard the fact that you were a human being. It didn't matter who you are. Whether you're white, black, or any other color in the rainbow, male or female, or even a child. Unless you are proven to be a good use for manual labor, they would kill you in any way they pleased. As Daniel wrote everything I stated, he began to shake. "Wait, even children?" he said in a really faint tone. I took another drink from my glass. Yes, I've seen toddlers and even newborns thrown into pits of fire. Oh my God, their screams. See, this is where I started to become numb from the whole thing. Even after the mothers witnessed their children burning into a crisp, they would shoot them and burn their corpses in the same pits just because they could. I can still hear their screams in my sleep. As I filled another glass, I said, "I'm sorry." It's one of those few things that really haunt me even to this day. Daniel puts down his pen and paper anxiously. "Oh my God, I'm sorry. We can stop now if you want." "No, it's okay. I needed to talk about that. I just need a moment." I took a deep breath and regained my train of thought. All right, where was I? Oh, yes, that was only the beginning. It was like the first circle of hell itself. Worse was yet to come, and even after being emotionally numb, I still wasn't ready. During my whole experience, for my 4 years of imprisonment, I'd say I spoke maybe a total of 10 words. When they gave me orders, I did exactly that. Most of the time it was a struggle, but I did what I could to stay alive. With the very little rations and water we were given, I nearly strained myself until dawn, but I was still alive. They specifically chose me to handle certain tasks as they did with anyone else they saw fit. I wasn't holding my breath, however. They could shoot you for target practice at any time, even while you were working at any time. In most cases, they would gather a large group only to be placed in gas chambers. Oh my God, the screams again. Even behind closed doors, you could still hear their screams as they suffocated to death. Daniel began to get angry. Those sick bastards, how could they do that? He gripped his pen tightly. Because they could, and because they could, I almost died. I was selected for execution because my time was up. I was against a wall with rotting corpses surrounding me. I thought their reeking flesh was the last thing I'd ever smell. The terrified faces of my fellow prisoners. The sinister smiles on the guards' faces. I thought that would be the last thing I'd see. They fired, killing everyone except me. Somehow, I was still alive. Not a single bullet hit me. I kept my eyes closed and held my breath and pretended I was dead. As awful as this sounds, I could feel blood smothering me, and I used it to my advantage. Oh God, this was when I almost truly died. I would much rather have been shot, but since they thought I was dead, they were about to dispose of my body in the pit of fire. Daniel suddenly stopped writing and looked at me confused. "Wait, you said you were still alive because you kept to yourself, right?" "Right. And you're saying they almost executed you and burned you alive, right? Well, if that was the case, how did you escape? You're giving me 2 different stories." Ah, shit, I thought to myself. This kid pays attention. I guess I gave myself away on that one, huh? He got his pen and paper ready once again. "What really happened? How are you still alive?" I hesitated for a brief moment. I'm going to need another drink for this. As I poured my last glass, I could feel his anxiety. He knows there's something I left out on purpose. He knows there is a truth that I didn't intend to tell. Well, he will know why my truth was hidden. Look, what I'm about to tell you is completely true, and I do not plan on going to a mental institution. He looked at me as if I was delusional. What do you mean by that? So, obviously, you see all these occult books here, right? You will soon come to the realization as to why I do, but you have to swear to me that you'll believe every word I say, okay? I am not crazy. Daniel appeared afraid. This is the part of my story that really fucked me up, and I have a good reason why I never talked about it with anyone. You're the only one I'll ever tell this to. I sighed. Ask any survivor of Auschwitz, and they will all give you the same reaction, same expression, and same fear. They are all too terrified to tell the tale. So, Daniel, I know how this sounds, but you have to believe me, all right? He nodded yes, while he began to shake. I could see a speck of sweat on his forehead. So, what happened? All right, here goes. I took a deep breath. So, there was this one prisoner who we all talked about during our time. We didn't know his name or his number for sure, but I believe it was Bruce. He was a really vengeful character. Rumor had it that he was somehow possessed or something. He occasionally attacked the guards, but the funny thing was that they wouldn't kill him on the spot. I saw him rip out someone's throat in front of an officer, and all they did was pin him down. I saw him rip out a piece of someone's rib cage and shoved it down his throat with brute force. I saw him take a man's gun and empty a clip into his face. Man, he was one strong, angry bastard. Daniel stopped me. Wait, he killed a few guards? That would be an understatement. He brutally mutilated them. Well, if that was the case, why didn't they kill him? Especially if he was a threat to them. I don't know. It's like they were expecting it, testing him somehow. I heard one officer say, "Perfect." Even to this day, I wish they had somehow killed him. I finished my drink. Daniel grew even more anxious. One day, he charged up to a guard, tackled him to the ground, and brutally beat him until his head was battered. That's when they finally decided to execute him. After 4 murders, they finally decided enough was enough, which was quite odd. I know it sounds strange and abnormal, but there was something about him they found fascinating. It took 5 guards to restrain him. An officer smiled and shot him in the heart. Even after that, he was still somehow alive. They dragged him to a flaming pit and tossed him in. I hesitated to tell him the rest. And what happened after that, he asked. I stared at him for at least a minute before speaking. Look, I really don't like talking about this. I took another deep breath. So, before they almost threw my body into the pit, I heard shouting and women's screams. It was so grotesque. They dropped everything they were doing, including me. As I lay there pretending to be dead with my eyes barely open, I could see 5 guards restraining the violent prisoner. His face was covered in blood, and he had an eager smile as the officer approached him. I could hear what they were saying. The officer said, "What a waste. You were so perfect. But it looks like you're no different. False hope for a flawless creation only to fail like all the rest. No matter, there will always be others of your kind." The prisoner gave a sinister laugh and replied, "When I get out of here, I will find you, dismember your flesh piece by piece, and feed it to your battered face while your family watches." He then spat blood in his face. The officer punched him and shot him point blank in the heart. "Toss him into the pit," he said. I took a deep breath yet again. Daniel was nervous, but very intrigued. So, what else happened? I sat there for a moment before I finished my story. They completely forgot I was lying there, so I stood up and hid behind a building. I know that was very reckless and would have gotten me killed for sure. But what happened next? Oh, dear God. I paused before continuing on. As they threw his body into the pit, I could hear him screaming. Such agonizing pain. But there was something peculiar about him. The more he screamed, the more distorted it became. Each scream was an octave lower than the last, and the volume progressed until it came to the point where it was monstrous and unbearable to hear. And suddenly, it stopped. It was like he absorbed the flames and he let out a demonic screech, gushing blood, which looked like a fountain of crimson. Oh my God, he didn't appear human anymore. His eyes illuminated pure white. His arms were covered in scales, to best describe it. They were as black as night with fang-like spikes that glowed blood red with claws that took on the same color and shape. He had large angelic wings that looked mystic. The wings were there, but it's like they made the illusion of mist, black fire, I can't even describe it. The next thing I knew, he attacked the surrounding guards swiftly. In quick moves, he butchered right through their flesh, and I know this sounds crazy, but I saw him forge a giant scythe out of their blood. It was like he defied the laws of physics and somehow made a solid, sharp weapon. Demonic magic, to best describe it. More guards came after him, and he took incredibly long and fast steps towards and slashed right through them. At one point, when a guard was in a pool of blood trying to run from the creature, the prisoner somehow created a thick spike that rose from the ground, impaling him from his anus out of his mouth. I don't know what he was doing, but it was like he could manipulate blood in any way he wanted, like he could control it at will. Clearly, their weapons were useless against him as he forged the scythe into a spiraling longsword. Can you just imagine the dread they felt as the last thing they saw were those glowing, malevolent eyes with that demonic laugh mocking their pain as he slaughtered them like helpless animals? It was literally a bloodbath. He brutally mutilated at least 15 guards before flying away. The oddest thing, he specially targeted the Nazi guards. No prisoner was hurt, not even a scratch on those who were nearby. It was like he unleashed all of his personal hell only to hunt down and murder those that caused his pain. Daniel was baffled and shook with fear. So, he just turned into some kind of monster and killed all those people? He stared at me like I was a madman. I know how it sounds, but it's the truth. What he did to those guards truly traumatized me. I see, Daniel said softly. He closed his book as he asked me one last question. So, how did you escape? After the creature fled, the rest of the guards panicked and ran away as well. They burned all evidence of our documents, their whereabouts, and left us for dead. It was the Americans that discovered the camp, and of course they came to our aid. I signed. Daniel continued to look at me in disbelief. I'm sorry, Mr. Bernstein. I don't know. Are you sure you know what you saw? I became furious with his question. In anger, I replied, Listen, kid. You don't what it was like down there. You don't know what it was like to watch little children burn right in front of your eyes. I've seen the Nazis pile bodies in a truck only to bury them in a trench. I raised my tone. I know what I saw. I've devoted my life to find out what that creature was. That's why my family left me. That's why my kids were scared shitless. They thought I was mad. They thought I was as crazy as my stories when I got all these books trying to find out what the fuck this thing is. Ask any other survivor or any other Bernstein that could tell the same story. They are too fucking terrified to tell the truth. So before you start calling me crazy, you might want to be a little more understanding of what I have fucking witnessed. Do you understand me? Okay, I understand. I got the chance to calm down as I sat on my chair. I poured myself another glass and softly said, Look, I'm sorry I screamed at you. I know this doesn't make any logical sense, but I know what I saw, and it was real. It really screwed me up, but I'm not crazy. Daniel calmed down as well. It's okay, I understand. He politely asked, Did you ever find out what this creature was? Number. I couldn't find anything that even closely resembled what I witnessed. Whatever it is, however, I have no doubt that it's still out there and it's hungry. Daniel grew nervous once more. Mr. Bernstein, I have a confession to make. My grandfather was a Nazi soldier, but I strongly disagree with his actions and his views, and that's why I'm writing this book. But this monster, you said he specially targeted men like him. If I'm related, does that mean I'm next? Well, I highly doubt he'll try to hunt you down for that reason, but just in case he confronts you, just don't tell him about your grandfather. From what I have seen, he doesn't kill innocent people. Just don't piss him off. And above all, whatever happens, do not bleed. Do not. Daniel had enough, and gathered his gear and walked out the door. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Bernstein. I must be going now. Have a good night." All I did in response was lift my glass and softly said, "Cheers." I knew he was terrified, but at least he listened to my story. I know what you're thinking. How could this be real? The textbooks would have described this. Oh, please. Those damn history books never reveal secrets that weren't meant to be told to the world. However, that's the problem. Nobody knows who this creature was, where did he come from, or why he was there. All I know is that he's angry, inexplicably powerful, and kills any Nazi that crosses his path. With that motivation, I still remain unsure whether he was a brute vigilante or just a beast lusting for blood. As a storm approached, it began to rain unnaturally hard. Seeing my old sketch of the figure I have made a long time ago, hoping I would find anything like it, I approached it with a smile while finishing my drink. As I stared right into those hypnotic white eyes, I asked myself, "What the fuck are you?"